At Navy Federal, I used to say loyalty is a two-way street. I want you as employees to be loyal to Navy Federal, but in return, Navy Federal needs to be loyal to you.
I'm Patrick V, and you're listening to the podcast Reimagining Leadership, where my focus is on helping individuals identify the behaviors to inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking to Cutler Dawson, who's the author of the new book, From the Sea to the C-Suite, Lessons Learned from the Bridge to the Corner Office. This was such an incredible opportunity to speak with Cutler Dawson about his book and the stories that he tells in his book, both from his career in the Navy as Vice Admiral through his career as the CEO of Navy Federal Credit Union, which is the largest credit union in the world. If you're a learner as a leader, you will walk away with ideas and inspiration on how to become a better leader. So let's get into it. Cutler, I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. I had the opportunity to read your book before we were getting together here, and I will tell you, it was one of the best books that I have read. And I said that to you several times, how much I enjoyed it. From the C to the C-suite. Obviously, you'll explain what that means to us. But I thought that would be a great place to start out in terms of what was the decision to put this book together?
Well, the decision evolved over time, and it was kind of fun. When I retired from the Navy and went to be the CEO of Navy Federal Credit Union, I thought about how I was going to reach out and talk to the people that worked there, many of which had never been in the military. And I found over my 14 years there that I would tell a lot of sea stories to paint a picture on what I was trying to convey to them. And they were real life experiences that I had. And they kept telling me that they enjoyed hearing them. And but what else are you going to say? But I truly thought that they did. And then people started telling me, you need to write a book with your stories, particularly my wife. I had some fits and starts. Then my wife set me up with this wonderful lady named Taylor Keelan, who is the co-author. And we worked together. And it just kind of came together. And I decided that I wanted to write the book for the employees of Navy Federal Credit Union, but also for aspiring leaders, including those that are coming out of the military that want to continue their leadership travel.
What I found interesting was even in the foreword, when I read that and you said, we wrote the book. And to me, that really stood out. We wrote the book. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, because I think that says a lot about your leadership.
I think we is a word that should be used all the time. A lot of people slip in the trap of using the I word. In this particular case, Taylor Keelan, who helped me, has written 18 ghostwritten books. And when we started the project, I said, Taylor, there's one requirement that we have to have, and that is, I want your name to be on the book. You're doing a tremendous amount of work. I can't do this without you. And she said, well, no, Cutler, no one's ever asked me for that before. So that's how the we came about. But I think there are many people that are just like me. They just wouldn't feel right unless the people that deserve the credit get the credit.
I may not have mentioned this when we had the initial conversation here, but one of the quotes that I will often use in a lot of the work that I do around leadership was a quote by John Quincy Adams that says, when your actions inspire somebody to dream more, do more, learn more, or become more, you're a leader. And really what stands out to me in that is actions inspiring, and it's behaviors, right? And you really exemplify that in the book as you write it through those stories of your interactions. And I was wondering maybe if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of your naval career.
Well, first of all, I love the way you describe it, leadership as behaviors, because I think that's spot on. You're not born brilliant and you're not born a leader. You're shaped as a leader on how you behave, and then it results in how you behave to other people, not only the people that you work for, but primarily the people that work for you. And it's so important that you exhibit the proper behaviors to get the best out of your people. I like to put it this way, or I used to put it this way at Navy Federal. If you take care of your crew, they're going to take care of you. You would be amazed that a Navy crew on a ship knows when their commanding officer has their best interests at heart. And they will do extraordinary things for him or her if they believe that. If they don't believe that, they may do the minimum to get by,
Yeah.
but they won't be like John Adams has described. They won't do extraordinary things. So they will far exceed anything that you could do by yourself.
Yeah. And it is interesting because that to me is what drew me to that is it's the inspiring part, right? It's not because I have to. I'm inspired to do it. I want to do that for you because of how you treat me.
And how many people have we all worked for where we've said to ourselves, I don't want to let them down.
Yeah.
Uh, I really respect them and like them, and I don't want them to be disappointed in me.
Yeah.
I had a captain early in my career that took over from a commanding officer that everyone hated. They just hated this captain. He was mean and he was nasty. And I was fortunate that I survived, but I did. And then this new captain named Pete Headley comes aboard and he talked to you. He got around the ship. He learned who everybody was. And then all of a sudden, we were working so hard before we knew it that we were just working hard because we liked him. And I'll never forget that.
When I hear that story, and that's in the book, right? You talk
Yes,
about that you were questioning getting out at that point, right? Like, this isn't the place for me.
I was. But also, who were questioning getting out. And this is a good lesson were the other officers on the ship, some of whom have never seen a leader other than the one that was nasty and bad. And then fortunately I had seen others before and I knew there was a Pete Headley in my future. And lo and behold, he showed up. And those officers that were also thinking about getting out all stayed in.
Yeah, he sounds like he was a pretty special individual.
He is and he was. And I think we all have Pete Headleys in our backgrounds.
Do you mind? There was a story that I remember reading about, and I'm not sure if it was with him or not, but it was when you were trying to raise morale and you had some of the sailors out on a powerboat around burning gas. I'd love if you could tell, because I think that's a great story.
That's the Pete Headley story.
Yeah.
Pete was trying to raise the morale of particularly the whole ship, but the officers in particular on the ship, because he figured that if the officers had high morale, they're going to inspire their sailors to have the same. And it really worked. There was a small boat that was attached to the ship that he would use to go out in the harbor in Guam, and we would go water skiing. But unfortunately, it was during the 1974 fuel crisis. And Pete Headley got called to task and called to see the admiral to explain why he was burning fuel water skiing in Apple Harbor. And Pete kind of thought his career was over. He went over to see the admiral, and the admiral's name was Admiral Morrison, the father of the singer Jim Morrison. And he looked at Pete and said, "Why are you doing this?" And Pete said, "To improve morale and to make being in the Navy fun." And the admiral said, "Good for you. Mrs. Morrison and I would like to join you the next time you go out." So
That was
we
such a
did,
great story.
and we all, I think, can relate to that. Well, by the way, it's particularly relevant in the current pandemic, in that don't lose your sense of humor and your sense of well balance. It might be easy to, just like in a fuel crisis, but hang in there and try to do the right thing.
Yeah, it's a point that certainly should be listened to. In the book, one of the things that stood out to me too is you talked about wanting to be a high quality employer for entry level employees, and that really stood out to me. And I was wondering if you could speak to the focus on that, but also how did that benefit Navy Federal?
Well, Navy Federal has had a long history of being good to employees. My goal was just to try to take it to another level. In fact, in 86 years of existence, Navy Federal Credit Union has never had a layoff. Even in the Great Recessions, just never had a layoff. They believe in a bond between the employee and the organization. It's the entry level employees in most cases that are going to have the contact with the customer, or as we call them in the credit union world, members. And you need a high quality person to do that. And to get them, you have to be high quality. For example, another thing that Navy Federal does, we need part-time employees, but we would give them full-time benefits to work part-time. Think about that. And that drives tremendous loyalty. And at Navy Federal, I used to say loyalty is a two-way street. I want you as employees to be loyal to Navy Federal, but in return, Navy Federal needs to be loyal to you. And that's no different than the bond that existed in the Navy when I was there. And maybe to some extent, that's one of the things I brought with me.
So along those lines, I'll transition into this. When you, and I don't know whether it was, if it was the name of a chapter or it's certainly in the chapter, but the conversation around walking the deck plates and how important that was. How did that transition over from being on a ship to being in the credit union? What was the value to that?
It was a tremendous value. And it was no different on the ship. I used to spend a tremendous amount of time getting around any ship that I was in command of. And it had an electric impact on the crew. I also warned officers in command not to retreat to their cabin. And we all need to remember that, or not retreat to your office, because the longer you're in a position, the more you think you know everything. And you have a tendency to want to stay where you're in your comfort zone. I remember on my cruiser that I had command of, it was near the end of my tour, and I'm out around the ship and I'm crawling under the number 3 generator in the aft part of the ship. And I got tired. And I said, holy crap, this is hard work. But then I said to the good parent on the other side said, no, you need to be out here. You need to see what your folks are doing because they're crawling under that generator and you need to be there and see that. I think you talk about it in your behavior items and you call it empathy. And one of the ways I did that at Navy Federal is I did tremendous amount of branch visits. And I would go and visit branches. And I had one requirement when I visited a branch, and that was I had to speak to every employee that was in there that day. And I would talk to them about themselves. I wouldn't talk about business. I mean, we might talk about business, and we generally would get around to talking about business, but I'd ask them about them. I'd ask them about their family. I'd ask them about their backgrounds. I'd ask them about where they wanted to be 5 years from now. It brought a tremendous, I can't describe to you what it did. I remember near the end of my 14 years, I was visiting a branch, and this young lady in San Diego said, Mr. Dawson, there's a rumor going around and we want to know whether it's true or not. And I go, well, what's the rumor? And she said, the rumor is there's a picture of every employee outside your headquarters office and that you know everybody by name. And I said, well, we've got 18,000 employees right now. And no, there's not a picture outside the office. And I don't know everybody's name, but I know your name. She said, thank you. What a nice rumor to have go around.
Yeah.
And that's because I'm walking the deck plates, what everyone needs to do. And once again, my point is the longer you're in a position, you have to make sure that you get out and do that because you get new employees, you get new crew members, and they may have never seen you before. So
when I hear you tell that story too, is I've worked for organizations in terms of coming in to have to do leadership work with different levels. And I've had executives that will say, no, I don't go out in the group. That's not my place. I'm here doing something else. And I will often say that to me, what happens is that employees give them the right answer, whereas I get the real answer in terms of what's going on within the organization, because there are many people that are so unhappy and this person is so removed that they don't realize that their behaviors are creating such a poor environment.
Yeah, and then you have to also think about what you're doing when you get out and about. You learn things, but you can't come back to the headquarters and punish people for things that you pick up out in the deck plates. But I'll tell you another kind of funny story. I just got in the Navy Federal, and my first trip I went to was Pensacola. This young manager down there was assigned to take me around, and my wife was with me on this trip. So we're going to the first stop, and I started asking her questions. And I've been in the CEO for 1 month. And I see this look of terror in her face. What am I going to do? She's thinking, how can I get these answers vetted through my chain of command before I answer his questions? And I kind of figured that out pretty quickly. And I said, look, Michelle, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And she said, what's that, Mr. Dawson? I said, the easy way is I ask you questions and you give me answers. And you tell me the best answer that you have. And the hard way is I reach in my briefcase and pull out this rubber hose and beat the hell out of you. And my wife chimed in at the time. She said, Michelle, he really wants to know what you have to say. He does not have a rubber hose in his briefcase. So fast forward 14 years later, I'm saying my goodbyes, and I see Michelle, and she presents me with a rubber hose, and
I love it.
I still have that rubber hose. So.
What a great story. There was another one along those lines that I remember you talking about where you were going into a branch and the answer seemed to be canned. You were getting the same answer. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
I want to, everybody wants to think things to go well for the boss. And my philosophy is, it is what it is. And you can't deal with it unless you know where your challenges are and what they are. And I noticed in a branch visit to San Diego that I was getting the same questions and the same answers to my questions. And I figured out pretty quickly that they had been scripted by the regional manager. I completed the visit and I called him up and I said, look, you can't do this. This doesn't help me. And don't do it again. When I left 14 years later, he's still at Navy Federal. He learned real quickly, but I'd have gotten rid of him if it had happened again.
Yeah.
So,
which I think is so important because the frontline employees look to you as they need you to defend them. As a leader, if you really want the real answer and they give it to you, but it doesn't look favorably, then they're looking to you like, who's going to protect me? And I think that's what happens in organizations a lot is they would love to say what's really going on, but they don't feel as though somebody truly is going to be an advocate for them, that they'll say it and then they're expendable. It's over.
That's right. But then also other things can happen too. I just had a recent experience, even though I'm retired. I visited a branch in San Diego right in the beginning of this crisis. I wanted to check on, I'm the ex-CEO, but I still care about them. And I wanted to check on their morale and how they were doing. And they were doing great. And it turns out there's a young lady that I had helped 3 years before that was in the branch. And what had happened 3 years before, I had made a visit and I was talking to her and I sensed that something wasn't right. And I left and I'm with the regional manager. And I said, what's going on with this young lady? He goes, oh, we moved her branch at her request because she got married and she's gotten a divorce. And now she can't get back up an hour away to our other branch because we don't have a billet for her up there. But she wasn't going to tell me that. She wasn't going to burden me with that. But I sensed that something was not quite right. And I said, okay, Richard, we're going to create a new billet for her up north. And I want her transferred tomorrow. So 3 years later, I come in, I hadn't seen her since then. Despite all the social distancing, I got the biggest hug I've ever had in my lifetime. So. But you got to, the message is you got to listen. It's beyond just immediate. You got to pick up on the sense of things too.
So in the book, you talk about that in terms of listening to hear versus listening to understand. And to me, that seems to be an example of even what wasn't being said, you were listening, right?
Yes.
Really listening to understand that something just didn't jive. Something was wrong.
I guess that makes sense that sometimes you can learn when people don't say something.
Yeah,
too.
exactly. What we don't say or what our body language says, we don't have to say words. It speaks for us.
But now speaking of listening, I had a thought for everybody that I also believe the longer you're in a position, the more tendency you have to talk rather than listen. And you do it for good reasons. You do it that you've seen things and you've experienced things and you want to impart your experience and your wisdom on the folks that work for you. But the problem with that is if you overdo that part, you're not listening anymore. And you don't learn anything when you're not listening. So you got to try to reach the right balance.
Yeah, that's great. I always remember being in sales, starting out, we were always told, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use that ratio. Pretty easy.
Yeah.
Easy.
I was working congressional affairs for the Navy. One of my officers took a trip with a Senate staffer. And when he got back, I said, how'd it go? How'd it go? He goes, oh, it went great. I really liked him. And I go, well, that's not important. How did he like you? Um, and that's so, how does the customer like you? You may like the customer and what he or she spends, but are they liking you in return?
And your employees are your customers, right? I mean, that's really
Yes.
your ultimate customer.
I was at a conference on Wall Street and quite a few years ago, and I'm talking to the CEO of Hartford Insurance Company. He says to me, he says, Cutler, what's the most important thing to you at your work at Navy Federal? And I said, well, my employees are my most important thing, because if they're not taken care of and they're not motivated, our customers aren't going to be happy. He goes, oh, I say my shareholders are my most important entity at my business. Maybe I should say employees. I smiled at him and I just said, well, you really got to do it. You just can't say it.
Yeah, lack of congruence. You talk about 4 answers in your book, and I thought that was really interesting the way you laid those out. And it sounds like that was shaped in you growing up, but it certainly transferred over. And I'd love to hear you just talk about those 4 answers.
When I entered the Naval Academy in 1966, that was one of the first things that was taught to all of us, is that in the Navy, there are 4 acceptable answers to any question. And those answers, and it's a generic response: yes, sir; no, sir; no excuse, sir; and I'll find out, sir. Yes, sir, and no, sir are pretty obvious. But let's talk about the last 2. No excuse means that if you make a mistake, you own the mistake. You don't blame other people. You don't blame the people that work for you. You don't blame the fact that you didn't have all the information you needed. You just said, no excuse, I will do better. And then with regard, when you ask a question, if you don't know the answer, don't make up an answer, because that can have disastrous consequences. As you can imagine in the military, if you turn to your navigator at sea and go, are we on a safe course to clear the harbor? And they don't know, and they say, yes, we are, you might run aground. It's better to say, I'll find out. And then if you're the captain, you can say, all right, let's come to all stop and not go out any further until we find out where we are. I find those 2 answers to be the best. And let me give you an example of no excuse. I had a young lady that worked for me at Navy Federal, and I had told her to put some controls in because I was concerned that we were going to be defrauded by a vendor that we were working with. Well, she put them in, and then 2 years later, she decided to take them out. And that's when he hit us. We lost money with him. So when I talked to her, you know what she said? She said, this is my fault. I'm the one that did this. None of my people. I'm the one that's responsible. I feel that I've let you down. To which I responded, yes, you should have talked to me about this and we could have talked it over. So she lost her bonus money that year. It was about $20,000. And you know what she did? She worked as hard as she could. She worked her heart out that next year. And well, guess what happened? She got an out of sequence President's Award for $20,000 that just happened to equal what she had lost the year before, because she was truly a person that believed in no excuse, and she lived it.
To me, when I hear no excuse, the ownership, to me, that goes right into another piece that you talk about, and that's about the true north.
Yes. I think we all have to do some soul searching on that. One of my mantras has always been do the right thing. And I picked that up early in my career when I went to command of my first ship. I was 27 years old. I had 5 years in the Navy, and my boss was in charge of 7 ships just like mine, but he had 32 years in the Navy. And he wore a World War II submarine combat patrol pin. He had been in combat in submarines during World War II. And when I made my arrival call on him, my first meeting with him, he looked at me and said, "Lieutenant Dawson, I only have one instruction for you. You do the right thing, and I'll back you up all the way." And that's the way he did. And so I tried to tell everybody that worked for me, do the right thing, and I'll have your back. And sometimes the right thing to do is not the expedient thing to do. That really resonated with the employees at Navy Federal. It empowered them to do what was right for the customer, the member, and at the same time, if they knew if they did that, it would be right for our organization.
As we wrap this thing up, one of the things that I think about, and I believe it was in the beginning of the book, but certainly toward the end, could you just talk to the success, the growth success of Navy Federal Credit Union? Because I think you speak to, it wasn't the focus of it, it was almost like the byproduct of the people that created that. And that really resonated.
Years before I got to Navy Federal, there was a chairman of the board at Navy Federal that put it very well. He said that an organization like Navy Federal should not grow for growth's sake. It should grow because it's providing superior service that people want to be part of. Everyone at Navy Federal really takes that to heart, and I took it to heart too. We quadrupled in size in the time that I was there, but we didn't think in terms of numbers. We measured our success in two things. One, member satisfaction, and two, employee satisfaction. One of the things that I would suggest this for anyone that's leading an organization, people don't always know that they really are in a powerful organization. And it really came home, for example, the Navy Federal employees when they came out on the Fortune 100 top places to work in the country list. In the past year, Navy Federal was number 19, and it allowed them to realize how good they were and how good their organization was. And that's a powerful thing. One needs not to lose sight of that. Employees, and then with regard to member satisfaction, the other thing was that Navy Federal has become one of the most trusted institutions in the country, that people believe that if they work with them, if they trust them with their finances, they will return the trust. And that's a powerful thing as well.
You have given so many examples for anybody that's either a frontline leader or an executive in an organization. The things that you talk about, your examples, is a must in terms of understanding these things today, in terms of what that can provide. So I'm grateful for you for all that you've shared with us and for writing this book, because I think there's so much there that we can all learn from. So thank you for that and for your service.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
Before we go, what's the best way for somebody to get contact with you as well as get your book?
It's pretty easy. Again, the title is From the Sea to the C-Suite, Lessons Learned from the Bridge to the Corner Office. And oh, by the way, I think it's a good read for people that were in the military or not in the military. People at any leadership level, I think will get some nuggets out of it. But you can order it on Amazon by the title or by my name. And you can also order it on the Naval Institute Press. And they have a website that you can go to, the Naval Institute Press. And I like to say it's a little book with big print.
It is a great read. So.
Thank you. You made it easy for me today. Thank you.
Great. I'm wishing you all the best.
All right. Thanks.
At the end of each chapter in Cutler's book, he lists what are called foot stompers. And as he mentions, the term foot stomper in the Navy applies to if there was something that somebody wanted to make sure that they understood to pay attention to, that it was going to be tested on later on, that they would stomp their foot. And that gave everybody the alert to pay attention. His book has so many foot stompers in it in terms of the messages and the stories that he tells, in terms of helping to build better organizations wherever you are. If you know somebody that would enjoy this episode, I'd ask you to forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. And it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating or a comment in regards to this episode or any other. Because when you do that, it allows this message to continue to get out there about finding a better way to inspire others. That's what these episodes are about. And there is a better way when we reimagine what leadership can look like. Until our next episode, I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best. Peace.